What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Man of Golf Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doc Russ. Today, we've got two more questions that continue to kind of pile in, and we appreciate you, the audience, for submitting these questions so we can answer them here live on YouTube. And I think it's really important for us to just continue to have decent conversations or honest conversations about some of the myths or maybe misinformation that's out there with regards to golf and with regards to how to improve your golf performance from a physical standpoint. And I think it becomes really, really important to make sure that we can hopefully provide you information that's, one, things that you can implement immediately, but also two, things that are really beneficial for you in the long run with regards to how you want to go about improving your golf game. So the first question, let's get right into it, is from a golfer. He says, "Hi, Russ. I'm an avid golfer. My question is with regards to golf flexibility. The question he asks is, why do I always still feel tight even when I've done a stretching routine consistently a few times a week? I feel like I haven't made any progress on my flexibility because I constantly am still feeling tight on a day-to-day standpoint." So stretching and flexibility, I think, is something that while I think a lot of people do to help improve their golf game and improve just their overall, maybe wellness, I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to flexibility and whether or not it's truly going to move the needle when it comes to your golf game. And so, flexibility, there's a number of different ways we can kind of talk about flexibility, but with regards to this, we're going to talk about flexibility in terms of static stretching, right? So holding one position for an extended amount of time, so that way we can kind of get those muscles to kind of loosen up and improve flexibility or improve mobility so that we can gain range of motion. And then by no means do I feel like this is something that you shouldn't do. I think it kind of depends on the context of how we want to create long-lasting change to see the progress that you want to see, and also see the performance improvements that you want to see, but also to reduce that, like you had said, the perception or the sensation of tightness that you're still feeling even after going through the stretching routine. And so I think the important part is, if we think of I'm going to try and make this as not as sciencey as possible, so that you can hopefully have a better idea or a sense as to what's going on. So in our muscles, we have these special sensors to call muscle spindles that help kind of that understand, or at least kind of figure out the stretch or the rate of the stretch of that muscle, but also it understands the length of that muscle while you're trying to do some of that stretching, right? And so, prolonged stretching, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, up to a minute, that can definitely inhibit that muscle spindle, which can help create some of that elongation for that specific time period. But unfortunately, the downsides, what we see is that as soon as you stop stretching that specific muscle, that muscle spindle length or that muscle length actually refers back to its normal resting state. And so I think that's why maybe some of the people that do a lot of the static stretchings are frustrated, because they feel like they're stretching, they're doing this routine that can take 15, 20, sometimes 30. We've seen people do like routines that are pretty extensive when it comes to static stretching. But yet they wake up the next day and they still kind of feel tight, and they feel like they constantly need to stretch, because that's the only thing that helps them feel better, or that's the only thing that helps them feel like it's going to reduce the likelihood of them feeling tight. And so, for those who are struggling with this, or maybe are in this boat and like, hey, listen, I'm doing this routine and it's not really helping me much. The question I always pose to you is it truly a flexibility issue? Are there other things that we need to kind of maybe look at that could potentially be creating some of that tightness that you're experiencing, or what the body is perceiving as tightness? And the first thing we kind of talk about is nerves. Nerves in general don't like to stretch. While there are some stretch components to them, if you put a nerve on stretch for an extended amount of time, usually it doesn't really like that. And so I think the important part is, when you're doing some of these flexibility routines, if you don't know what you're stretching, or if you're creating maybe more harmful effects to the body than positive ones, then that could be another reason why you could be experiencing some of this persistent tightness that you're experiencing even when doing this routine. So the first thing I would always kind of tell you is to kind of maybe get an assessment to make sure there's what we call quote unquote neural tension in the body, where those nerves are maybe a little more taut and a little more tighter than they should be, which is creating that sensation of tightness, right? You got to understand what controls the sensation of tightness, or the sensation of much of anything, is the body, is the brain, right? It's the nervous system. And the nervous system will control all those things, especially if it perceives, let's say, some irritation or if it perceives some danger. Those are the things that we always want to take a look at, is how can we calm some of the nervous system down so that that perception of tightness or lack of flexibility is no longer there. And that's what we want to kind of do long term. And so I think the hard part when you're doing these routines is sometimes changing the routine can be beneficial, but also too maybe looking to other modes of improving flexibility outside of just the static stretching routine that people are doing. And so the next place we always kind of turn to is just strength training. Okay, I think strength training is something that applies an external force or an external load to those tissues, which can then create lasting change in terms of structure and in terms of elongation of that tissue. And so, I think when you're doing strength training, when we talk about, let's say, muscle contractions, when the muscle is lengthening, or what we call an eccentric contraction, that has a tendency to create more of that lasting change that you're looking for, but it also helps reduce that perception or that sensation of tightness in the long run if you do it more consistently. So I would say, instead of doing, let's say, a flexibility or static stretching routine every day that maybe sometimes you've been doing, I would maybe kind of take a couple of days out of that stretching routine and input some strength training, and start to think about slow tempo when it comes to like lowering the weight or bring the weight back up to its normal position. Those are the things I would kind of focus on to see if that helps reduce that sensation of tightness that still continues to be there even after you do those stretching routines. I think strength training can go a long way. I think it's something that people don't utilize enough. And I'm sure if you've heard this podcast, you've heard me say that many times, but strength training can be a really, really great resource to be able to check a lot of boxes in terms of strength, durability, injury reduction, but also too improving flexibility when you work on certain tempos, if you working through a full range of motion. So I think for us, people who strength train regularly 2 to 3 times a week and add in some different tempos to their strength training to kind of focus on some of that lengthening and some of that kind of elongation, that goes a long way in reducing the likelihood of that tightness that people are experiencing, especially if they're just kind of going through their day to day. We do hear a lot of times people who are at their desk sitting for a while, they just feel like they're tight all the time. They're tight in their upper back, they're tight in their hamstrings, they're just tight in their legs in general, and they feel like they need to stretch all the time. And so, again, obviously too, being sedentary, and especially sitting for an extended amount of time, could definitely create some of that tightness there. But also too, going to the well of trying to stretch it, and then go back to that static sitting position again. Sometimes that yields a negative result for what you want to kind of have accomplished there. So I would say the final points I would say with regards to stretching and flexibility is, I definitely think that there's a place and time to do some of those static stretches. I definitely think it's maybe more after a workout or maybe after a golf round. I wouldn't say it's something that you should lead with when regards to that. I think it's something that you want to make sure that when you're leading with a warm-up or something like that before golf or exercise, you want something that's more dynamic, that's going to get the heart rate up so that you can get your nervous system to really kind of kick in and be excited, so that when you're doing some of the stuff, the strength training, some of the golf work that you're going to do, your body's ready for that. Static stretching doesn't really kind of improve tissue temperature. It doesn't really improve much of anything with regards to a dynamic effort movement like golf or strength training. So sometimes that's why we do that towards the end or after a session, to allow the body to cool down, get the heart rate to calm down, or get the nervous system to calm down as well. So I definitely think that for those who are struggling with their stretching routine, or they're not seeing progress with your stretching routine, I would say to you, maybe do less stretching and more strength training, especially with slower tempos, controlled motions through a full range of motion, and see if that helps reduce that tightness that you're experiencing throughout the day, and see if that helps kind of improve your overall kind of just function and performance when you're doing a lot of the stuff that you're going to do moving forward with regards to your golf game. So hopefully that kind of covers that. Again, flexibility is a loaded topic. It's one of those things where should you not? I think a lot of times it really just kind of depends. And I know that's an answer that people don't want to hear, but it really does depend. Depends on the context, depends on the situation, depends on the activity that you're doing, and it depends on whether you're actually getting benefit from it, right? If you're not getting really, really a lot of benefit from it, then maybe we need to change the modality that we're doing to help kind of create that long-lasting change we're looking for. Second question, pretty simple one here, is what is one thing that you look at when assessing your golfers that many people overlook? And I'm going to talk from the physical standpoint. Again, I don't look at um, things per se from a swing standpoint. While we do look at the swing and we look at 2D motion, we look at down the line and face on in terms of just golf swing analysis. I'm going to talk about it with regards to what we look at that many people in the, let's say, physical performance and aspects of it maybe kind of overlook. And the first thing we always kind of talk about is, do they know how to use the ground, that ground reaction force, right? And I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, in that when we apply force to the ground, there's going to be an equal force applied back to us. And that way we can use that force to generate power, club head speed, distance, and whatever we're looking for. And so we always kind of look at, do they know how to properly use the ground when swinging the golf club? We see a lot of golfers that struggle to create speed or create distance because they're very, very upper body dominant. And the problem we see too is a lot of people are upper body dominant, but then don't have the requisite mobility to get into these positions to create more length, to create more time, to then create an impulse that's going to generate a lot of club head speed and a lot of distance. So when we see that, we see a lot of repetitive stress injuries in the upper body, but we also see that they're really just not using their lower body. The lower body is just kind of going for the ride, and it's there, and they're not using the ground to their advantage to create that torque through their lower body to then create speed. And so how we normally measure ground reaction forces through force plates. Now, force plates are very, very costly, and those are things that aren't readily available in, let's say, gyms or rehab settings. So there's some simple ways we can look at ground reaction force. We can look at vertical jump height just to see how high they jump and measure that in inches. And then there's also what we call a broad jump. So they're just basically standing in one position and they're jumping in front of them as far as they can. So we're looking at like a linear jump, and we're looking at a vertical jump. And that tells us a little bit about how well they can use their legs to create force and to create power. And if we can just look at some of those things there, we have some normative data that we look at and say, well, based on your age, based on what we're kind of looking for, here's where you should ideally be with regards to these numbers in terms of distance jumped, to be able to ideally feel like we're in the right spot. And in most cases, people are below that significantly. So ground reaction force is something that I think many people overlook, maybe don't really know how to assess too well, or maybe don't look at it enough because there's other things that they want to kind of pay attention to, and that's totally fine, right? The physical screen is definitely something that we kind of pay very, very close attention to make sure that the body can move the way we want it to move. But if it moves pretty well and they're still lagging club head speed or distance, or they feel like they want to improve upon it, then absolutely we'll look at ground reaction force to make sure that we're not missing anything. Because ultimately, if they can't use their ground, or if they don't know like foot pressures and where the pressure should be in their foot, in the backswing, but also on the downswing, then they're leaving a lot left on the table to be able to, say, create the goal of improving club head speed and improving distance, or gaining 15, 20, sometimes 30 yards, because they can just now know how to use the ground and be able to sequence things better when it comes to delivering the club head to the ball. So I think ground reaction force is something that can be very, very simple to look at, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. And again, if you want to make it more complicated, you can look at some of the different data and look at a number of different things. But I think in a very, very basic setting, you can look at a vertical jump, you can look at a broad jump to get an idea as to how far they're jumping. And then that'll tell you also too how they can accelerate, but also how they decelerate. Right? When they actually land, how are they landing? How are they absorbing that force? Okay. And that's more from a joint health, tendon, muscle standpoint, is are they able to, one, produce force, but also two, are they able to then absorb it when they land? Because again, when you think about the golf swing, as you go through your follow through, right, your body then has to rapidly slow down. Okay. If it doesn't slow down, you just go towards your target, which you don't want. Okay. You got to be able to create enough energy, right? Store it up, unleash it, right? And as soon as you create that for power and acceleration, you've then got to slow it down as fast as possible. And so sometimes that can be difficult for people to do. And that's why sometimes when you look at some of those ground reaction forces, not only looking at the actual force itself, but you're also looking at how they absorb that force too. So ground reaction forces are, I think, something that I definitely think is overlooked. It's definitely something that we look at too, to then be able to create more efficiency in their lower half or the lower body, to then be able to create more speed and more power. So I definitely think if you're someone who's in rehab, who's in strength conditioning, who's in performance with golfers, ground reaction forces are a great way to kind of look at. Now, there are force plates. There are things that you can look at too, to look at foot pressures and where their pressures are. But again, in a basic setting, sometimes just looking at forces, where their foot pressures are, or where they feel their foot pressures are in their backswing and downswing can go a long way in telling you what you want to look at moving forward. So those are the two questions that we want to answer today. Again, I think stretching and flexibility is always something that comes up with regards to golf performance. And, again, while we don't see a static stretching flexibility routine be in the top tier of things that improve golf performance, I definitely think it can be part of a bigger envelope or a bigger umbrella of just overall wellness to be able to kind of help the body feel good, because that's what we want it to feel, right? And especially after a round of golf. So, and then lastly, ground reaction forces, I think, are something that we need to look at more frequently to get an idea as to where their foot pressures are. Are they creating enough force through their lower half? And again, if they've got swing faults like early extension or sliding or swaying, then that can tell us a little bit about why they're doing some of the swing characteristics that they have, because maybe they're not using the ground to the way they should be at that point in time. So stay tuned for next week's episode. We'll answer more of your questions. Again, let us know in the comments if you have any further questions about how we can help you with your golf game. Also, too, if you aren't already subscribed to our page, subscribe and hit that notifications button so you know when the next podcast is dropping. Again, we try and do these every Tuesday from 2:30 to 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. These are quick hitters, 20 minutes, 30 minutes tops, to make sure that we can answer your questions. Keep sending those questions in so we can answer them in a timely manner. And then we'll make sure that if you can't catch it here live, we'll put it up in all the podcast areas where you can listen to on your whenever it's convenient for you. So I'm Doc Russ. I am the owner of Mana Performance Therapy and Mana Golf Performance. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope to see you guys next week.